stand before you representing people with disabilities. And here is our submission to this committee. The Disability Amalgamation Community Trust welcomes the opportunity to make submissions on the Postal and Telecommunications Amendment Bill 2025. As a national disability rights organization, we commend Parliament for seeking to modernize Zimbabwe's communications framework. However, we note with concern that the bill in its current form does not adequately address the constitutional and international obligations of the state to ensure accessibility and inclusion of persons with disabilities in the postal and communication services. Section 83 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe obligates the state to take measures to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to information and communication. Zimbabwe is also a state party to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which requires states to promote access to information and communication technologies on an equal basis with others. We have identified some gaps within this amendment bill, Mr. Chair, which we would want to highlight now. The first observation we have made, the bill is using an outdated definition of disability. If you look at clause 2, line 32, the bill defines disabled person in medicalized terms, which is inconsistent with the rights-based approach of the Constitution and the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Indeed, even our Persons with Disabilities Act, if you could also look in it, you will find a better definition. This risks excluding persons with psychosocial, intellectual, or temporary disabilities. Now, if we look at clause 3 on the objects of the Act, the objectives focus on efficiency and innovation, but omit explicit commitments for accessibility, affordability, and inclusion of persons with disabilities. The third gap we have identified, after I give the gaps we have identified, we are going also to proffer some amendments which we believe this committee will take into consideration as they finalize this bill. On objects, yes, I've spoken about that. Let's look at the functions of the authority on clause 4. The authority's functions do not include obligations to enforce disability inclusive standards, accessible format, or universal design. On clause 20, Universal Service Fund, the fund's objects are silent on financing assistive technologies, accessible ICT infrastructure, or subsidized tariffs for persons with disabilities. Now, the last gap we identified is on the board composition. That is clause 27. The bill does not guarantee representation of persons with disabilities in governance structures, despite constitutional provisions on inclusivity. Now, I'm going to give, through you, Chair, the proposed amendments to the clauses which we have highlighted, and also some additions which we think will actually make our bill tight. On clause 2, the definition. Replace the definition of disabled persons with persons with disabilities. Means individuals with long-term physical, psychosocial, intellectual, sensory, or other impairments which, in interaction with various barriers, may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. That's the modern definition of disability. When we are referring to persons with disabilities, we no longer say disabled persons, they are persons with disabilities. We also propose that we can add on the definitions accessible format. And accessible format means information provided in Braille, sign language, audio, large print, easy to read, or all other formats usable by persons with disabilities. Because if we don't put this in our law, people will say it's not in the law, it's not our law. So we urge this committee to actually take on board this recommendation. Then we also propose to put on clause 2 the definition of universal design. It means the design of products, environments, programs, and services to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. I will move to clause 3, Mr. Chairman, the object of the Act. We propose that you insert to ensure accessible, affordable, and inclusion of persons with disabilities in all postal and telecommunication services. Also add to promote universal design and assistive technologies in communication sector. I will move to clause 4, Mr. Chairman. We have only identified 5 clauses, so I'm almost about to finish. I'm on clause 4, functions of the authority. Please add on its function to monitor and enforce disability inclusion standards in postal and telecommunication services. Add also to ensure that all licensees provide services in accessible formats and promote universal design. And the 3rd edition we are proposing, Chair, to consult representative organizations of persons with disabilities in policy formulation and regulatory decisions. We have seen, Mr. Chair, that most of our laws, they are not consistent with our Constitution, which calls for inclusion of persons with disabilities. And we see this as an opportunity with this amendment bill, that the inclusion aspect is embodied in all our laws we are to enact as we go ahead. Then the last clause is clause 20, Universal Service Fund. Amended to include to finance assistive technologies and accessible ICT infrastructure for persons with disabilities, and to support community services telephones. These submissions, Mr. Chair, are being made in good faith and as a civic obligation of Disability Amalgamation Community Trust to ensure that our laws are substantively inclusive of persons with disabilities. I so submit.